So this is going to be part 2 of 103 amazing facts about the Black Indian of the Western Hemisphere. So now we're going to go to the American Dictionary of English Literature to understand what the definition of a so-called American is. American, noun, a native of America, originally applied to the Aboriginals or copper-colored races found here by the Europeans, but now applied to descendants of Europeans born in America. Number 32, the term Moor was applied to dark-skinned, brown-skinned, and reddish-brown-skinned people who are not only indigenous to Europe, but to the West and North Africans. Even Black Indians of the Western Hemisphere were also dubbed with this title. 33, Indigenous Black Celtics, Indigenous Black Britons, Indigenous Black Portuguese, and Indigenous Black Spaniards, all also known as Moors, had a long time knowledge of indigenous people in the Western Hemisphere. These Moors were well informed of the different customs, traditions, and languages of the natives of the Western Hemisphere. These dark-skinned Europeans, Moors, were used as buffers by pale-skinned Europeans to help colonize the New World. These indigenous Black Europeans, aka Moors, not only solicited the New World to pale-skinned Europeans, but also waged war on indigenous peoples of the Western Hemisphere, aka Indians. So, sellouts, Uncle Toms, in a sense. 34. Certain Black indigenous Europeans, aka Moors, that went under such titles as clergyman and European nobility shared a common consciousness with pale-skinned Europeans. That common consciousness being that the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere, aka Indians, were untamed heathen savages. 35. Both dark-skinned and pale-skinned Europeans who were either Celtic, Briton, Gaelic, or what have you, who were fleeing religious persecution in Europe, the 30 Years' War, 1618 through 1648, and many other European wars, I might add, and were struggling to preserve ancient traditional customs dubbed pagan ways, upon arrival to the New World, ran to the bosom of Black Indian nations indigenous to the Western Hemisphere soil, who still held on to and were practicing traditional spirituality. Both cultures were different. However, both were able to relate to each other's gods. Black Indian nations and different clans native to Europe both shared a common spirituality that centered around the forces of nature and honoring of the ancestral spirits. 36. Certain Moors helped to navigate Christopher Columbus's voyage to the New World. He wasn't lost. He knew exactly where he was going simply because of who was on the boat with him. In my personal opinion, based on the little information that I've done over the years, it wouldn't surprise me if Christopher Columbus was a so-called man of color, of ruddy or tawny complexion. 37. The U.S. constitutional government is a plagiarized copy of a Black Indian governmental system, the Iroquois Nation. 38. The founding fathers did not find anything. They went to Black Indians, the Iroquois Nation, seeking assistance to break away from their chief back in England, King George III. The Iroquois Nation taught them their system of government. The only part that the so-called founding fathers left out was the matriarchy. Black Indian women ruled the Iroquois Nation. 39. Most Black Indians of the Western Hemisphere found themselves seduced by European lifestyle, customs, and traditions. 40. When the American Revolutionary War broke out, Black Indians found themselves fighting against their own kinsmen. Some Black Indian nations sided with the British, while other Black Indian nations sided with the colonial rebels, aka Americans. 41. After Black Indian nations helped to set up the colonial government America, in addition to help to sponsor military support for the new colonial government, Black Indian nations continued to fight in war amongst themselves, as they did before and after Europeans set foot upon the Western Hemisphere shores. 42. Black Indians were not conquered by Europeans or the so-called white man. Black Indians had a rich history of intertribal warfare amongst each other that continued before and after the European arrival. The intertribal warfare that existed among Black Indians in the Western Hemisphere was so great that it left them in a state of impotency, with impotency setting in after years and years of clan warfare, in addition to the attraction of European trinkets, customs, and traditions, and the worshiping of the god named Isis or Jesus, because there was no letter J in the 1600s or before the 1600s, all assisting in paving the way for European occupancy of the Black Indian lands, their spirits, and their minds. 43. After the colonial government was established, America, Black Indian nations continued to aid the new colonial government with the military assistance on other Black Indian nations that fought against European expansion in the taking of their ancestral lands. 44. General Mad Anthony Wayne, aka the Black Snake, was a Black Indian who served under the George Washington administration. The army of General Anthony Wayne consisted of mostly Black Indians in the ranks, as did the entire colonial government army. Besides Black Indians making up the bulk of the new colonial government army, American Moors also filled up the ranks. 45. George Washington established treaties or contracts with various Black Indian nations, as well as with the Moors, for military support against other Black Indian nations who did not support the occupancy of the new colonial government America. 46. After the colonial government America confiscated most Black Indian lands, the colonial government, refused to pay the Black Indian warriors pensions for the military support. Sounds like a so-called Negro, right? 47. During the American Civil War, Black Indians joined the Confederate Army in hopes of winning to secure what little ancestral lands they had left. 48. Other Black Indians joined the Union side of the American Civil War to fight for their own objectives as well. One of those objectives being seeking prosperity within the American system. 49. Nigger Jack, also known as Nigger Jack, was a Black Chickamauga, a Black Indian. This ancestor led raids against the colonial rebel army Americans during the colonial rebel uprising American Revolutionary War. He fought alongside of the British Tories. His hideout was a cave in the vicinity of what is now known as Chattanooga, Tennessee, if I'm pronouncing that right, in the state of Georgia, in the region known as Cobb County. There is a park, a road, and a creek named after this great warrior. Number 50. There were thousands upon thousands of Black Indians who fought in the American Civil War and in the wars before and after this war who were Black Indians or native to the Western Hemisphere region, but were obvious to this fact. They only thought themselves to be Negroes. Their parents and their parents' parents who had lost the knowledge of themselves, tribal identity, in all honesty, simply passed on the next generation the colonized title of Negro to their children. Thus, an unbroken chain of ignorance continues to survive. So, key word, they only thought themselves to be Negroes, their parents and their parents' parents who had lost their knowledge of themselves. So we see that also in Isaiah 4 and 6, for my people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge. We also see the implications of state and literacy laws between 1740 and 1834, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, North and South Carolina, and Virginia all passed anti-illiteracy laws. So what does that mean? You dumb down the people, and then you indoctrinate them in the schools and teach them that they are African Americans, Negroes, or all from Africa. And you have other people teaching and telling you who you are versus seeking and trying to understand, like, where do we come from? 51. Most Buffalo soldiers were Black Indians dispatched by the U.S. Army to assist in the colonizing and confiscation of other Black Indian lands west of Mississippi River. Reservation natives who don't know the true history and who are also brainwashed by images feel that the Buffalo soldiers, who are ill mistaken and ill classified as African Americans, helped the paleface drive them off their lands and onto reservations. This last aspect of things, however, is true. In addition to this, one must keep in mind that most reservation natives are hybrid descendants of the true indigenous seed. And that's where most people need to grasp the concept that a lot of people are hybrids. The indigenous man is the man with the kinky, curly, woolly hair, quote unquote, the Negro, not in just one continent, but all lands. We see that the original man, indigenous man, had kinky, curly hair. 52. Many black Indians who fought in the American Civil War, either on the Confederate side or the Union side, were not acknowledged as being indigenous or native. They were acknowledged as being Negroes. See how they group us all together. 53. Most of the Navajo code talkers who were used to assist the U.S. government in World War II were blue-black Indians. This photo and film footage of the black Navajo who participated in this war were carved out of history. 54. The term Negro and colored was not only applied to black Indians to psychologically and spiritually remove them from their lands. These colonized titles were also applied to black Indians who were incorporated into the slave market. 55. Black Indians did slave raids on each other before and after European arrival. 56. Black Indians owned other black Indians as slaves. These slaves were also classified as Negroes. 57. European writers took advantage of number 56, fact above, to say that Indians owned slaves. Fake European images of so-called Indians were promoted, showing so-called Indians owning slaves. Art paintings were displayed showing distorted images of natives in the Western Hemisphere owning dark-skinned people as slaves, who in most cases were also native. The fake images of indigenous people in the Western Hemisphere, which usually displays them as having pale skin, show them owning slaves whose skin is always depicted as being dark. Pale-skinned Europeans helped to create a consciousness which subliminally says that slaves and Negroes are synonymous. When most people hear or read about a slave, simultaneously the image of a dark-skinned person appears in their mind by showing a fake pale-skinned natives owning dark-skinned people help to create the illusion that so-called Indians and Negroes are two separate races, when in essence they are the same people. 58. The U.S. government and U.S. government-sponsored natives are preaching a doctrine that says the so-called black people became Indian or native people as a result of acquiring citizenship with different indigenous nations here on the Western soil, as to say that no dark-skinned people lived in the Western Hemisphere up until the transatlantic African slave trade. This tactic is exercised in attempts to discredit indigenous black Indians from claiming their true homeland, and subliminally supports the ridiculous notation that every dark-skinned person that is interpreted as black is from Africa. Number 59. Queen Latifah, the rapper and actress, is a black Indian. Number 60. Most black Indians today refuse to accept that they are indigenous because they have fallen victim to the spell of fake images. If their hair isn't straight or curly and their cheekbones not high, neither their eyes slanted or their skin light or a reddish hue, they just simply decide that they're black from Africa. 61. Most black Indians of the Western Hemisphere who are falsely labeled as African Americans and Black Americans fought for their civil rights during the 1940s through the 1960s. They were not known as black Indians or being indigenous. Some knew, others didn't. They went under the cloaking title of Negro, Negro Civil Rights Movement, aka Black Indian Civil Rights Movement. 62. Most interstate highways and roads in what is now known as the United States of America used to be at one time black Indian trails and pathways that led to other black Indian towns and black Indian cities. The paths were widened and laced with concrete and renamed as interstate highways by the Pale One. 63. Most cities and towns today in what is now known as the United States of America sit on top of ancient black Indian cities and towns that were there first. 64. In most cities and towns in what now is known as the United States of America, there remains hundreds of thousands of black Indians buried under the concrete as a result of casualties of war. 65. St. Louis, Missouri used to be a black Indian city called Cahoca. Cahoca at one time was the largest city north of Mexico and at one time one of the largest cities in the world, outranking most cities in Europe. 66. Black Indians did not only use paths and trails as a means of transportation on the surface, but also used the underground cave tunnel system, the underground railroads, right? 67. Black Indians revealed, taught, and navigated Europeans through the underground cave tunnel systems. So, I mean, the people had to know this land, to know the caves and the terrain. I mean, they just couldn't have come from another continent and know like where to go and whatnot. It just doesn't make any sense logically, right? 68. Games such as basketball, soccer, and lacrosse originated from black Indians in the Western Hemisphere. 69. Black Indians played dice games just as they continue to do on most inner city corners in what is now known as the United States of America. 70. The boxer Muhammad Ali, aka Cassius Clay, is a black Indian. 71. Black Indians did not always kill each other in war. War used to be carried out by playing games. 72. During the 16th through the 19th centuries, black Indians migrated from their ancestral lands in what is now known as North America to much more ancestral lands in the Mexican, Central, and South American regions. This exodus was a result of both pale-skinned and dark-skinned European invasion. 73. Many black Indian chiefs were put on annual salaries by different European nations throughout the 16, 17, 1800s. European nations such as France, Britain, Spain, Portugal, and the Dutch Netherlands paid black Indian chiefs of the Western Hemisphere a salary for their support in the slave market. European currency, rum, thundersticks, guns, and free trip to Europe were all elements that made up this annual salary. 74. Many black Indian chiefs were also put on European annual salaries to provide military support for various European nations. European annual salaries were established depending on who you signed treaties with or aligned yourself with. 75. Many black Indian warriors, both females and males, became hired privateers, pirates, for various European nations during the 15th through the 18th centuries, known as warriors on water or thugs on water. These black Indian warriors were paid salaries to harass, rob, and shake down cargo ships for various European nations, depending on who they contracted with. This, of course, also depended on which European nation their nation formed treaties with. 76. Some black Indian warriors did not honor their nation's alliance with European powers and left their own nation and became freelance privateers. They decided to work or contract for whomever. Some even privateered for themselves. 77. Many black Indians went to Europe to receive pale-skin education. 78. Many black Indians not only attended pale-skin colleges and universities, but also enrolled into pale-skin military schools where they learned pale-skin warfare and taught pale-skins their own method of warfare. 79. Many black Indians who became thoroughly indoctrinated into pale-skin education and pale-skin religion came back to their homeland and helped pale-skins colonize their own people. 80. Many black Indians who became thoroughly indoctrinated into European lifestyle took on European names and European titles such as military officers, clergymen, interpreters, or just plain businessmen. 81. Many black Indians who became indoctrinated into European lifestyle in fact moved to different European countries such as Spain, England, France, and Portugal, denounced their own nationality and became citizens of these European countries. 82. Many black Indians who left their homeland throughout the 15th through the 19th centuries and migrated to various European countries, their progeny are still there to this day. Some of them have maintained the information of their true roots of origin, while others have become lost in the sauce. 83. Depending on which European nation Black Indians had intercourse with or formed treaties with, also depended upon how their identity was eventually altered. Black Indian nations who had intercourse with Spain eventually became known by the colonized titles of Latino and Hispanic. Black Indian who had intercourse with the French became known by the colonized titles of Creole, Black French, and Haitian. Black Indians who had intercourse with the British became known by the colonizer titles of Negro and Colored. Black Indians who became victims of British subjugation are still going through colonized title changes. For the moment, they are presently known as Black Americans and African Americans. 84. Most Black Indian nations honored matriarchal societies. 85. Most Black Indian chiefs were women. 86. Black Asians from various dynasties, Chow, Shang, and many others, migrated from Asia thousands of years ago to the regions not known as North, South, and Central America. These Black Asians mixed in with the Black natives who were already occupying these lands. This explains why some natives or indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere, aka Indians, have high cheekbones and slanted eyes. This type of image of the native of the Western Hemisphere has been widely promoted. Other natives who do not possess these features were carved out of history to promote how other natives looked would not have been a balancing move for the colonizer. 87. Black Indians lived and thrived in the Western Hemisphere during the time of the Ice Age. They occupied the regions of what is now known as Southern North America, Mexico, Central, and South America, down by the equator, where it's hot and warm. 88. Huge monolith stone heads have been unearthed in the Mexico region. This ancient culture has come to be known as the Olmec people. Past and present archaeologists and anthropologists both agree that the Olmecs represent not only one of the oldest cultures found in the Western Hemisphere, but also agree that the Olmec represent the mother culture of the Aztec, Inca, and Mayan civilizations. 89. Some people teach that the Olmec migrated from the Nile Valley region in East Africa to the Western Hemisphere. If this is true, they were only received by Black natives who were already residing here. 90. Many Black Indians who became indoctrinated into European lifestyle joined European orchestrated fraternities and secret societies, such as the Order of Freemasonry. 91. The Black Indian Joseph Brant of the Iroquois Nation became a Freemason. 92. There were some Black Indian nations of the Western Hemisphere region who had known blood ties to various clans in Africa. 93. Many Black Indians navigated the oceans and did not live in an isolated community as taught by Paleface in their school systems. 94. During the early 1800s, certain Black Indians who went under the colonized titles of Negro and Colored helped to establish settlements on the west coast of Africa for other Black Indians. These Black Indians went under another title. They were also known as the Black Elite. In the late 1800s, other settlements were established in Liberia. Many Black Indians, those who knew who they were, indigenous to the Western Hemisphere, those that didn't know, and those that thought that they were from Africa, settled in West Africa under the disguise of Negroes and Coloreds seeking a better life. A Black Indian by the name of Paul Cuff, a Black Pequot, if I'm pronouncing that right, helped many Black Indians settle on the west coast of Africa. Paul Cuff owned and operated many boats. He had his own shipping company, and in that era became one of the richest Black Indians in America at that time. 95. Many Black Indians east of the Mississippi River who wore turbans adorned with feathers, besides their languages having the idiom of the Hebrew tongue, the wearing of the turban was a physical sign of their genetic link to the Hebrew Israelites. Let that sink in.
Mama, how do we know Jesus wasn't black? He could have been from the lost tribe of Israel. They were supposed to be black.
I bet they were. If ever people were lost, we're it.
96. Certain black Indian nations acted as police for freshly established European colonies. These black Indian police protected European settlements from other black Indians who did not want Europeans settling on their lands. 97. The colonial rebel uprising, American Revolutionary War, was mainly won for the following two reasons. 1. The new colonial rebel government's constitutional foundation was a black Indian constitutional government foundation, that black Indian nation being the Iroquois nation. 2. Most of the military support came from the black Indians indigenous to the Western Hemisphere region. Other military support came from the Moors. The more supported came from Moors that were from Spain, France, Portugal, and Morocco. Other Moor support came from renegade Moors from England that broke away from England to support the colonial rebels. Also keep in mind, when Spain, France, and Portugal gave assistance to the colonial rebels, there existed black Indians that also filled up the ranks of these armies. Remember, black Indians had been migrating to Europe for quite some time before the American Revolutionary War. Some of these black Indians knew where they were returning to, while those who were thoroughly colonized did not. 98. During the Seminole Wars, the U.S. government recruited other black Indians to assist them in the war against the Seminoles. 99. Black Indians who had lost the knowledge of themselves, tribal identity, and were labeled as Negroes and Coloreds were also recruited in the U.S. Army ranks to fight in the Seminole Wars. 100. The United States government had to abandon the war with the Seminoles. They could not defeat them. 101. Many Africans that came to the United States in this present day and time know that most so-called African Americans are indeed black indigenous Indians. 102. Most foreigners from other nations abroad are waiting for so-called African Americans to reclaim their rightful titles. Last but not least, 103. The reclaiming of the identity of the black indigenous Indian in the Western Hemisphere region is not a difficult task. It does not require petitioning outside of yourself to someone else to acknowledge who you are. Your mother, your father, your grandmother, and your grandfather. The information that has been passed down through your lineage to you from them is acknowledgement. Neither does it require the testing of your own DNA by the way of the colonizers' pseudo contraptions. The earth and the ancestral spirits know perfectly who you are. Just claim who you are.
Is we were bad to the American, forget about it, it's in the past. The question should be the ones that the founders asked. Who are they? Who are they?
Who are they?
What knowledge do they have? Can you imagine the difference we would have now if we would put our differences aside and put our past in the past and concentrate on today and say, let's learn from each other? What do you have? What is that?